Those things that I wrote in those diaries and my journals were locked in a box. I never wanted anyone to see them. And for some reason, I was like, all right, let's open it up.
While 22 million people laughed at her character every single week, she was sitting alone in the dark, pregnant, terrified, and trapped with a man who came at her with a shard of glass. The fortune was real, and the fame was undeniable. But the smile the world was watching was a performance hiding 34 years of secrets so heavy that when her family finally read those pages, the room went completely silent. The fortune Christina left. It is early 2026. Christina Applegate is propped up in a California king bed in her Hollywood Hills home. A heating pad she has named Jake Ryan pressed against her side. A book resting on the nightstand. Outside that window sits one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in Los Angeles. A property she bought at 23 years old for $950,000 and is now worth somewhere between $5 and $7 million. Her net worth is estimated at $25 million. Emmy Award, Tony nomination, Golden Globe nods. A Hollywood Walk of Fame star. 259 episodes of one of the most watched shows in American television history, still streaming residuals into her accounts. By any metric the world uses to measure a life well built, she is a success story with nothing left to prove. Then, her family read the book. The room, by multiple accounts, went completely silent. You with the Sad Eyes was published on the 3rd of March, 2026. It is assembled entirely from diaries she kept since she was 13 years old. Written in the dark, locked in boxes she showed to almost no one, and it contains 34 years of secrets so raw and so specific that even the people who loved her most did not know the half of it. Her editor has said she has never seen a high-profile author lean into darkness with that kind of willingness. Christina has described writing it as taking milk of magnesia for the soul. She said she puked it all out. She said the readers are now the therapists she is releasing 34 years of locked material toward. The fortune that makes her family cry is not the one in the estate. It is 34 years of truth, finally opened when everything else was gone. But to understand why that matters, you have to go back to where it all started, and it did not start anywhere that looked like a fortune. The girl who was born into the deal. The house in Laurel Canyon sat inside a neighborhood that carried a mythology in the 1970s about musicians, artists, and dreamers who had believed that creativity was a form of protection against ordinary cruelty. The mythology said nothing about what was happening inside the houses where the dream had already curdled. Inside Christina's home, there was a stepfather who was a violent alcoholic. There was a mother being pulled under by addiction. There was a level of poverty specific enough that she had felt genuinely elated on the night there were hamburger buns for dinner. She had found her mother crying on the floor more than once. She had gone without being cared for in the ways that children needed to be cared for. And she had absorbed all of it the way children absorbed things they had no framework for, silently, completely, with nowhere for any of it to go. When she was 5 years old, a babysitter mistreated her. She carried that experience in total silence for nearly 50 years before writing about it in her memoir with the plainness of someone who had decided the 5-year-old version of herself deserved honesty more than she deserved to be shielded from the truth. She said what the experience had done to her was permanent and specific, that she had never felt fully comfortable being touched for her entire life, that the consequence had followed her into every relationship she had ever tried to build, like a shadow she could not outrun, no matter how far she ran. Dance was what had saved her, not as a metaphor, as a literal fact. The training studio had become the only room in her world where the rules made sense and effort produced a reliable result. She had begun dancing at 3 years old. She had joined the Screen Actors Guild by 5, and by the time she reached middle school, she had already become the financial provider for her household, sustaining a family through acting work because the structure it gave her was the only structure available in a home that offered almost none. When Fox first came to her with the role of Kelly Bundy, she had read the character breakdown, called it gross, and told her agent she was not interested. The only reason she ever walked into that audition room was that the first actress they had cast did not work out, and the producers came back with a revised script. She went, she read, she got the part, and nobody in that room had any idea that the 15-year-old girl standing in front of them had been paying her family's bills for years and was about to spend 11 seasons building a fortune that would one day fund the only morning routine that still mattered to her: getting her daughter to school. Married with Children premiered on the 5th of April, 1987. The American Family Association tried to get it canceled before the first season finished. The boycott brought in 22 million viewers at its peak. Christina played Kelly Bundy for 11 seasons and 259 episodes, performing with precision for a live studio audience, while the private reality running beneath her career was something she could show no one. At the height of the series, her per-episode salary had exceeded $125,000. In 1995, she had bought the Hollywood Hills home for $950,000 at 23 years old. She had understood, with the clarity of someone who had grown up without food security, that the ground beneath a Los Angeles property did not simply disappear. What was happening behind the smile? It was a Thursday in June, 1991. 22 million people had been watching Married with Children that week. Christina Applegate was 19 years old and the most recognizable face on primetime American television. Every magazine had wanted her photograph. Every advertiser had wanted her face on their product. She had been earning $125,000 an episode, and she had been sitting completely alone with a secret she could not tell a single person. She had been 6.5 weeks pregnant. She had been terrified. And the man who had gotten her pregnant was the same man who had been grabbing her around the neck, dragging her by the legs across the hallway floor of their home, pouring a bottle of alcohol down her throat, and coming at her with a shard of glass. He had told her repeatedly that no one would ever love her the way he did. He had called her, and she had recorded these exact words in her diary, written alone in the dark at 19 years old. A disgusting, self-obsessed, eating-disordered fat pig. She had been the most recognizable teenage face on American television, earning $125,000 an episode, and she had believed him when he said she was worthless. She had described the relationship through her own diary entries because she had felt those entries were the only authentic record of what living inside it had actually felt like. She had also written about a separate blocked memory involving a late television producer from which she had woken with marks on her body and the certain knowledge that something had been done to her that she could not fully reconstruct. Both accounts had gone into the book because she had decided that what happened to her in the dark was owed to the light. She had explained, with the clarity of someone who had made full peace with the answer, why she had stayed. You were told a lie about your own worth, and at some point, you either believed it completely or you were too frightened to leave. And frequently, both of those things were true at exactly the same time. She had said this publicly, with visibly shaking hands, on Good Morning America in 2026, because she had needed every woman who had ever stayed in something that was hurting her to understand that the strength of a career was no defense against that particular lie. She had been the most famous teenager in America. She had been earning more money in a single episode than most people saw in a year. And none of that had protected her. When Married with Children ended in 1997 and producers had pitched a spin-off, she had declined without hesitation. Kelly Bundy had never been her. The character had funded her freedom, and that transaction was complete, and she had not needed a second's reflection to know it. What she had built afterwards was one of the most deliberate reinventions in the entertainment industry's history. A career assembled not from momentum, but from a series of choices made by someone who had learned early that no one was going to make the right choices on her behalf. From Kelly Bundy to Veronica Corn-Ingstone, on film she had walked into the audition for Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and deployed a piece of profanity so precisely timed that Will Ferrell and director Adam McKay had started laughing before she finished the sentence. She had gotten the role of Veronica Corn-Ingstone. The film had grossed over $90 million worldwide. A sequel had followed years later. 2 guest appearances on Friends as Rachel's self-absorbed older sister had earned her a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series. Samantha Who, which she had starred in and also produced, had brought further Emmy nominations and a Golden Globe nod. Broadway had been the choice that defined a particular kind of courage. In 2005, she had taken the lead in the revival of Sweet Charity, and during the pre-Broadway run in Chicago, her foot had snapped in the opening scene. She had kept performing for 20 more minutes. She had later rejoined the cast in specially constructed shoes, and the show had run for 279 performances at the Al Hirschfeld Theater. The injury had caused permanent damage, and by 2013, she had been saying that she actually could not dance anymore because of it, and dance had been the thing that saved her life since she was 3 years old. The loss had carried its full weight. Her foot snapped in the opening scene of Sweet Charity. She kept performing for 20 more minutes. That was the only version of herself she had ever known how to be. Netflix had come in 2019 with Dead to Me at $325,000 per episode. The show had been critically acclaimed. The chemistry between Christina and her co-star Linda Cardellini had been something that could not be manufactured. The kind that arrived between 2 actors when both of them brought something real to the work. Everything from the outside had appeared to be the triumphant final chapter of a career built against enormous resistance. What no one outside her closest circle had known was that while she had been filming the final season, she had been arriving on set each morning in a wheelchair. A diagnosis had been delivered on a Monday morning Zoom call that she had said she would never forget. The diagnosis that came through a screen. It had started with tingling in her toes. The kind of symptom a person running at full speed through a demanding production wrote off as a pinched nerve or dehydration and filed away for later. She had mentioned it casually to her chiropractor during a routine session, and she had said she would never forget the look that crossed his face when she described it. His mother had experienced the exact same symptom, he had said, and he had immediately changed the subject. She had let it go because there was a show to finish. By the summer of 2021, she had no longer been able to walk the distance from the production parking area to the set on her own. The crew had quietly begun accommodating everything without drawing attention to what was happening. She had finished the show because she had promised Cardellini they would finish it together, and breaking that kind of commitment was not something she was capable of doing. Then the Zoom call came. Her neurologist had appeared on screen. He had looked at her in silence for a moment. She described feeling very long. Then he had said he was sorry. He had shown her the MRI scan. There had been 30 lesions distributed across the surface of her brain, the largest of them sitting directly behind her right eye, which explained why that eye had been hurting constantly for months, while she had been attributing it to screen time and stress. She had begged him not to say it out loud. The scan had already been on her screen. In June of 2021, she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. There were 30 lesions across the surface of her brain. She begged him not to say it out loud. The scan was already on her screen. The physical consequences of the disease had arrived with a brutality she had never once softened in any public account. Her daily pain had settled at around 8 out of 10. She had been hospitalized more than 30 times in 3 years for vomiting, nerve pain she described as unimaginable, and symptoms severe enough that on bad mornings she had been unable to reach the glass of water on her nightstand. She had gained 45 pounds from steroid infusions and lost 30 through vomiting. She had begun wearing adult diapers. She had taken to scooting down the staircase of her own home on her backside on the days when walking was not something her body would allow. She had named her heating pad Jake Ryan. At the 2024 Emmy Awards, she had walked on stage assisted by Anthony Anderson, received a standing ovation from the entire room, and opened with the observation that they were totally shaming her with her disability by standing up. She had followed it with "body, not by Ozempic." She had said she blacked out from emotion immediately afterwards, and that colleagues told her she had been very funny, which she accepted entirely on their word. But 13 years before the MS had arrived, there had already been something else, something that had required its own particular form of courage, its own particular performance of strength she had not actually felt. The mathematics of survival. Christina's mother, Nancy Pretty, had survived breast cancer twice. Because of that history, Christina had begun getting annual mammograms at 30, attending faithfully for 6 years, while every result came back clean. Then, when she was 36, her physician at Cedars-Sinai had ordered a breast MRI instead, because her tissue was too dense for a standard mammogram to read with accuracy. Dense breast tissue read on a mammogram the way a snowstorm read on radar. The storm was visible, but the interior was not. The MRI had found a suspicious area on its very first scan. The mammogram taken the same day had found nothing. The biopsy that followed had come back in April of 2008 as ductal carcinoma in situ stage 0 breast cancer, caught entirely because one doctor had ordered one test that the standard protocol had not required. The genetic test had confirmed she carried the BRCA1 mutation, which gave women an estimated 87% lifetime risk of breast cancer and a 44% risk of ovarian cancer. Her mother had carried the same mutation. A cousin had died of ovarian cancer that same year. The standard treatment for her stage 0 diagnosis would have been a lumpectomy, followed by 6 weeks of radiation, after which she would have kept her breasts. She had initially had 2 lumpectomies. Then she had sat down with the mathematics, the BRCA1 mutation, the 87% lifetime risk, the cousin, the recurrences, and odds, the numbers that did not soften no matter how many times she looked at them, and she had made the decision. She had cried in the doctor's office. She had told him there was absolutely no way she was agreeing to a mastectomy. And then she had thought about it until the word no had become impossible to justify. Before the surgery, she had photographed her body from every angle she could manage, wanting a record of what it had looked like. She had called the bilateral mastectomy an amputation in every interview she gave afterwards, not because her doctors had used that language, but because no other word had been honest enough for what the surgery actually was. Both breasts had been removed in July of 2008. She had not looked in a mirror for a year afterwards. The part she had only recently admitted publicly was that after the surgery, she had gone on television and performed a positivity she had not felt. She had called herself a warrior. She had counted her blessings out loud. She had given the interviews that the situation seemed to require. And she had said, with a directness far more powerful than anything she had said at the time, that she had been doing a disservice to every sick person watching who had needed to hear the truth instead. She had not been a warrior surviving with grace. She had been a woman whose body had been surgically altered in a way that had devastated her, and the expectations of every room she had been placed in had given her no permission to say so. She had shown courage. The grief had been real. She had built a non-profit organization before she had finished recovering. The test that had saved her life had been inaccessible to most women who needed it, precisely because of cost. She had gone on Oprah. She had stood on the Stand Up to Cancer telethon stage. She had turned the worst year of her life into an organization that had since helped thousands of women access the same scan. She had later had her ovaries and fallopian tubes removed after Sadie was born because the 44% ovarian cancer risk had made that choice the only mathematically defensible one. The hardest thing she was living through. Sadie Grace Lenoble had been born on the 27th of January, 2011, to Christina and Martin Lenoble, a Dutch musician they had married in 2013. The mother Sadie had known growing up was a woman in perpetual motion, someone who ran and danced and appeared at the school gate every single afternoon without exception, someone who took up the entire room when she walked into it and made everything feel grounded and anchored. Their home had been entirely organic. In her memoir, Christina had used one word to describe what the disease had done to her daughter: broken. She had chosen it because no word with less weight had been honest enough, and she was someone who had always understood the difference. Sadie had absorbed the initial shock by going very quiet, watching, waiting, processing the way children sometimes did when the thing in front of them was too large to respond to directly. But as she had moved from 9 toward the teenager she had become, the stillness had cracked open, and what came out had been grief and confusion and a kind of anger that had no clean target. In 2024, Sadie had herself been diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, a chronic condition where the heart beat abnormally fast when moving from lying down to standing, producing dizziness and severe fatigue that could make even ordinary movement genuinely difficult. A mother managing MS and a daughter managing her own incurable condition had found themselves inside the same house, both learning what it meant to inhabit a body that surprised them every morning, both doing it without any guide for how it was supposed to be done. Before the memoir had been published, Christina had let Sadie read some of the diary entries. Not all of them, but enough for a 15-year-old to understand that her mother had always known what pain felt like from the inside. That this had not been the first darkness she had walked through, and that she had survived every version of it that had arrived before this one. What she left behind when the box was finally opened. The box had stayed locked for 34 years. It had stayed locked while she had earned the Emmy, collected the nominations, and received the star on the sidewalk outside the Dolby Theater. It had stayed locked while she had gone on television after the mastectomy and called herself a warrior and performed the positivity she had not felt. It had stayed locked while she had raised Sadie and watched the MS arrive, and been hospitalized 30 times, and scooted down her own staircase on her backside and named a heating pad Jake Ryan, and blacked out from emotion at the Emmy Awards. The box had simply waited. Because there had always been a show to finish, a daughter to get to school, a performance that the situation required. She had also written about the night at a Miramax party, where she had watched Harvey Weinstein directing his behavior at a woman nearby and had called him out on it to his face. She had written that she could see him immediately reassessing her. She had written that she had known in real time that he was afraid of her. She had also written about the blocked memory involving the late television producer Kim Manners, from which she had woken with marks on her body, and a certain knowledge that something had been done to her that she could not fully reconstruct. Both accounts had gone into the book because she had decided that what had happened to her in the darker was owed the light. Christina had described writing the memoir as therapeutic in the most visceral possible sense. She had puked it out, and the readers were now the therapists she was releasing 34 years of locked material toward. She had also said she kept the book on her nightstand, picked it up on difficult nights, and asked herself out loud why she had said all of that. She had always put it back down, and she had always arrived at the same answer. There were people who had been through things they had never been able to say out loud, and she had needed them to know she had been sitting in that same darkness right beside them. On the Armchair Expert podcast, she had said she was not certain she would be around in 10 years. She had said it as a fact she had made a form of peace with, mostly because there was no cure and the disease continued to move, and she had stopped pretending otherwise. Her father had died in 2025 and was in the memoir, written about with the same honesty she had brought to every other page. There were no exceptions. There were no people too close to be told the truth about. The financial estate was real, specific, and substantial. $25 million estimated net worth. The Hollywood Hills home is worth $5 to $7 million. Residuals still flowing from 259 episodes of a globally syndicated show, a Primetime Emmy Award, 4 Golden Globe nominations, a Tony nomination, a Walk of Fame star, a nonprofit that had funded thousands of screenings for women who needed them. By every measure the world used to count a life's worth, the estate was considerable. And yet, none of it was what had made the room go silent when the pages were read. None of it was what had sent the tears. The thing that had done that was simpler, quieter, and more valuable than any of it. Every morning, regardless of what the night before had delivered, she had gotten Sadie to school. She had gotten out of bed, or she had scooted down the staircase on her backside, or she had found whatever version of movement her body had been willing to offer on that particular morning. And she had gotten her daughter there. Then she had come home. She had gotten back into the California king bed. She had pressed Jake Ryan against her side, and she had done it again the next day. She had said she woke up every morning with one thought before anything else arrived. Not about the disease, not about the money, not about the memoir or the 30 lesions behind her right eye, or the Thursday in June when she had been 19 years old and completely alone with a secret she could not tell anyone. She had woken up thinking, "I am Sadie's mama." And she had said that was the only reason she still needed to be here. The fortune that had made her family cry was not the one sitting in the estate documents. It was the 34 years of truth that had been kept in a locked box and finally opened when everything else had been taken away. It was the pages she had let Sadie read before publication, so that a 15-year-old girl living with her own incurable condition could understand that the woman in the bed had been through darkness before. Every kind of darkness, and had come through all of it, and was still, every single morning, getting up. Christina Applegate had not built a life that went according to any plan anyone would have drawn up for her. She had built it out of whatever had been available, including every piece of pain, every locked diary, every performance of strength she had not actually felt, every version of herself she had been forced to leave behind along the way. She had turned all of it into something that had outlasted the disease and the career and the fortune and every headline that had ever been written about her. That was what she had left behind. That was all of it. And it was more than enough. Tell us in the comments which part of her story hit you the hardest, because this woman has given all of us a great deal to think about.